I welcome you to my World of Warcraft raiding guide in expansion Wrath of the Lich King on patch 3.3.5a. I'm going to be talking about the class Shaman and the specialization enhancement and why I am so damn in love with it. As for a overview of what I'm going to be talking about in this guide, I'm first of all going to be talking about why you should be playing an Enhancement Shaman just as much as I do. I'm going to talk about what exactly an Enhancement Shaman does, so you can get a brief overview of what the class is and if it's fit for you or not. I'm going to be talking about specifics that will help you maximize your DPS, that being talents, glyphs, set bonuses, races, professions, gems, enchants. And I'm going to also talk to you about the priority list which we follow to make sure that an Enhancement Shaman can get the maximum DPS out of his class. I'm also going to talk about some more detailed things such as preferred stats and some specific gear pieces such as trinkets or maybe special weapons. And last but not least, I'm also going to talk about some useful add-ons that I use to make life easier. Alright, so why should you play Enhancement Shaman? I mean, many people say that Elemental or Restoration are just way better specs than an Elemental enhancement could ever be. So why the heck would you play Enhancement, right? So I've written down a list of pros and cons to show you just what I think makes Enhancement attractive. First of all, for the pros, Shamans have crazy utility. That's pretty much for every spec. They have their totems, they can react quickly with emergency heals, they have a lot of CC and purges and so on and so on. Really a ton of spells to use. And with that comes a lot of room for customization. Also, your talents can be customized a lot because there's only a few key talents that you really need. The rest is kind of like a playground, so like certain other specs maybe really don't have a lot of room for customization in the talent trees because they have to get all of those really good talents, so there's no room for anything. That's not really the truth for Enhancement Shaman. Enhancement Shaman is a very involved class. You have a lot to do, but also a lot to look out for. If you enjoy playing a challenging class, where you always have to look at all of your spells and all of the possibilities, then you're gonna love Enhancement Shaman, because I think it's probably like one of the most fun classes to play, because you have so much to do, instead of being an Arcane Mage that just uses his 3 buttons to do his rotation. One of the pros as well, that kind of obviously is like subjective. There's not really that much gear rivalry for Enhancement Shamans. The only people that really roll on your gear are hunters, and they usually aim for armor penetration, whereas you ignore the stat. So it's really easy for you to get gear. I guess if you get some leather pieces for best in slot purposes, then it's also the rogues, but you shouldn't be bothered too much by other people trying to get your gear. And the last pro for me is that obviously if you play Enhancement Shaman, you have the ability to get a dual spec and choose a second class, which obviously is great, or a second specialization, I mean. Yeah, Elemental and Restoration both are really fun specs to play, so there's not really any issue with that. I myself play Elemental as a dual spec, so I kind of can offer my raid everything they need. Some cons about Enhancement Shaman: the DPS unfortunately is only in the middle area, so when you get to the end game gear where everybody knows how to play that class, when you're raiding Lich King 25 heroic or something, you will probably never get above the average DPS that people pull in the raid, like the top 10 or something, because Enhancement Shaman just didn't get as much DPS as other classes did. It's not as easy. One of the negatives for me is that you work with priorities instead of a fixed rotation, which on the one hand makes it more challenging. On the other hand, working with priorities instead of a fixed rotation requires a lot of work during the raid and can quickly lead to you losing DPS if you have to focus on mechanics over your priorities. And last but not least, I brought the same point as a pro. It's a very involved class, it's very challenging, there's a lot to do. If you're not the person for that, then you're probably, instead of having fun, just gonna get frustrated by that. So that's something to consider for you. Alright, so I'm gonna talk about the playstyle now. The playstyle of Enhancement probably can be defined as the class in World of Warcraft that is a mixture of melee and spellcasting more than any other class. The specialization is extremely proc heavy and has so many effects that can trigger on chance, which on the one hand makes it really interesting and really fun, because like sometimes you can get all of those procs at once and you can deal crazy burst damage. On the other hand, it makes your DPS pretty volatile, meaning that sometimes your DPS can end up 2000k lower than your average DPS. As a specific to mention, I also wrote down Wind Fury weapon, which kind of is what makes procs really interesting for me. I love Wind Fury weapon because it has the chance to make you attack 3 times instead of once when you trigger it. Except for that, totems of course are really important. They offer a great utility to the raid. Enhancement Shaman also is the only spec that will have to work with a lot of refreshing of totems, because you use Magma Totem, which only has a 20-second duration. So it will belong in your priority list to constantly refresh the Magma Totem and work with Fire Nova. A lot of the spells that are included in the priority list will also get used very often. You will have to rotate a lot between spells. You will try to get everything out of every single global cooldown that you can. And that is a challenging but rewarding way to play, in my opinion. Alright, I've made a screenshot of the abilities I use during raids, and I'm quickly going to talk about the key abilities that Enhancement Shamans play with. So, give me 1 second. Alright. First of all, we have Storm Strike, which kind of like defines Enhancement for me. Storm Strike is an attack with 2 weapons and increases the nature damage the enemy takes for the next 4 nature spells as well. So it kind of opens your Earth Shock and Lightning Bolt to do more damage. And since you attack with both weapons, you can proc both the Wind Fury weapon on your main hand and the Flame Tongue weapon on your offhand, dealing some good amount of damage and granting you a big chance of crits. Lava Lash is a fire-based offhand attack that also belongs into your priority list, has a lower cooldown than Storm Strike, but basically just is there as a filler. It's a really solid ability. It's like usually very low on the DPS list, but it's still a solid contribution of something like 5% maybe. So yeah. It also is one of those abilities that really is key to an Enhancement Shaman. Earth Shock and Flame Shock both kind of belong in one packet because they share their cooldowns, but Earth Shock can be more used as a damaging tool, and Flame Shock probably will be your highest priority because you want to keep that Flame Shock debuff on the opponent up for all of the time, because it will just crazily increase your damage output. Earth Shock on the other hand can lend your tank a hand, and also you will have the chance to increase the damage of Earth Shock if you have the Storm Strike debuff up on the opponent. Lightning Bolt, you may be asking, well, do you stand still and cast Lightning Bolt? No, there is a talent that allows you to sometimes instant cast Lightning Bolt or Healing Wave. So whenever you get the 5 stacks of Maelstrom weapon, and that is the talent that I'm talking about, you will be wanting to use Lightning Bolt to increase your damage output significantly. Fire Nova, which is also one of your key abilities, especially during AoE fights, which can only be triggered if you have a fire totem up, but deals some good amount of damage. During the early phases of gear, when you still have a very low mana pool, I recommend you not using this a lot, because it really drains your mana. So unless you are very adept with your mana management, you will probably not want to use this too much. Magma Totem, which, as I mentioned earlier, you have to refresh every 20 seconds, is also very key. It deals area damage as well, and allows you to use your Fire Nova, which just, yeah. Fire Nova and Magma Totem offer you a great increase in damage output. And the remaining spells on this lower bar pretty much are utility spells. I use Chain Lightning whenever there's multiple enemies, more than one, because if there's only one enemy, Lightning Bolt will do more damage and drain less mana. Purge for the emergency cases, if you need it on any raid boss, for example, Launcher Access. Frost Shock is very useful for kiting mobs in certain raid bosses, such as, for example, the Users on Professor Putricide or the Blood Beasts during the Deathbringer Swordfang encounter. And on my mouse buttons I also have the Wind Shear and Healing Wave, which both allow me to, pretty much heal in emergencies whenever necessary with my instant cast, and obviously Wind Shear to interrupt any ability I have to during boss fights. As for my remaining totems, next to Magma Totem, I usually use Strength of Earth. If that already is available, you can also use Stone Skin. Both really are good. I use Healing Stream because I usually always have way too many paladins in my raid, so they just hand out Greater Blessing of Wisdom, and I use Healing Stream to up the raid healing for a bit. And on the Air Totem, you can either use Wind Fury, or if you have a Frost Decay in your raid, you can just use the Spell Haste Totem, Wrath of Air. The upper spells pretty much are my cooldown bar. The only thing you can ignore is the Tremor Totem, which I sometimes use in certain boss fights to ward my team from fears. I usually let my healers be put into my team, and I can ward them from the fears. The key ability of an Enhancement Shaman as a cooldown probably is Feral Spirit, which summons 2 Spirit Wolves which deal a crazy amount of damage. They probably up your DPS by 500 to 1000. And they also heal you like crazy for every hit they do. And they also obviously benefit from any kinds of buffs. They benefit from Bloodlust or Heroism. So it's really smart if you kind of combine all of your abilities together. Shamanistic Rage also is really great. It only has a 1 minute cooldown. It reduces the damage you take, and it grants you mana on attacks. Also, if you have the 2-piece tier 10 bonus, you gain an additional 12% damage while Shamanistic Rage is up, which is crazy because it basically increases your DPS output by 12% for every 15 seconds, and it has only got a cooldown of 60 seconds, so it's pretty much as a 3% permanent damage increase, if you could say so. Fire Elemental Totem has a very high cooldown of 10 minutes, unless you use the Glyph in longer fights, which makes it 5 minutes. It also greatly increases your DPS output, especially on AoE fights, because it itself already does Fire Nova. But if you also cast Fire Nova yourself, you will be having a great amount of AoE damage, which is very potent and can clear any trash quickly. Next to that is obviously the key ability that shamans have had forever, Heroism, Bloodlust. Everybody loves it. An amazing raid cooldown to use during raid boss fights when things get tense, or just to finish everything before it gets too late. And of course, because I'm a Draenei, I also have Gift of the Naru, which I just put there as a filler basically. The only things that you can't see on this right now that I use is Lightning Shield, because Lightning Shield I usually just refresh whenever I don't have any stacks anymore. There's a talent that allows you to apply Lightning Shield stacks on attacks, which basically means you will increase your damage output if you keep Lightning Shield up. And of course I buff my weapons with Wind Fury and Flame Tongue, but I don't need that on the bar down there. Alright, so now that I've talked about this, let me move on. Talents. Now we're going into depth. I've just pretty much created the talent tree I think is most useful. You can see it right here. It's pretty basic. I'm not gonna go over this in detail. I think most of this is self-explanatory. The only thing I went for is the Earth Elemental talent, which increases the attack speed reduction on my Earth Shock by 10%. Which I take over mana regeneration talents because I don't have mana issues in general, so I rather have my tanks take less damage and be able to finish an encounter because they can tank 2 or 3 more hits when it gets nasty, than me wasting my talent points on mana, which I have enough anyways. yeah, I will include a link to this talent tree in the description where you can look about everything, and if you have any questions, just post them in the comment section. Glyphs. Alright, so Enhancement Shamans have a lot of glyphs to choose from, because Shamans in general, as I said, have a lot of spells. But it's not really that complicated to choose the best glyphs for an Enhancement Shaman. Storm Strike increases the damage done by the stack that you apply by nature spells by 8% if I'm not wrong. So it's a big impact to your DPS output, and I think it's really worth it because your Earth Shock, your Lightning Bolt, your Lightning Shield, they all do nature damage. Glyph of Lava Lash also is a must, because if you have Flame Tongue on your weapon, on your offhand, and you use Lava Lash, the power of Lava Lash will increase by a whopping 10%, which makes up a lot. If you play on a server such as Molten, where you play Wind Fury instead of Wind Fury Flame Tongue, then obviously you're gonna want a different glyph, but in the specific example where a server works correctly and you are supposed to bring Wind Fury Flame Tongue to increase the Lava Lash damage, you should also be getting the glyph. The third glyph is the one that I constantly switch depending on the boss fight I'm on. If I am on a on a short boss fight, which is like 5 minutes, everything up to 7 minutes basically, I use a Glyph of Wind Fury weapon, which increases the chance for Wind Fury to proc. But other than that, if I have any long fights, such as for example Lich King Heroic, I usually get the Fire Elemental Glyph, which reduces the cooldown by an entire 5 minutes. Well, yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. I can use it like up to 2 or 3 times during the fight, which is great, obviously. As for minor glyphs, for enhancement, there's not really anything you should bother about. You can just take whatever you like. Alright. Talking about the set bonuses, I've listed tier 9 and tier 10 because those are pretty much the only ones that are relevant for the patch 3.3.5. So if you have questions about the lower tier ones, you can still ask me. I can still analyze them for you. But these are the ones I'm experienced with. So the tier 9 set bonus, especially compared to the tier 10 set bonus, is pretty bad. Like, the 2 set tier bonus of tier 9 is okay, I guess. It increases your chance to have a higher DPS output, but like, it's not consistent. It's just more chance, which Enhancement Shamans kind of already have enough. And the 4 set bonus really just is underwhelming. Because, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't make up a lot of your DPS. The Earth Shock, Flame Shock thing. As for the tier 10 bonus, tier 10 really, like the 2-piece bonus, you can already see it. It's crazy good. It increases your DPS by 12% for 15 seconds every 60 seconds. It's like crazy. Especially because Shamanistic Ration increases your damage output, regenerates your mana, and reduces the damage you take. It's like a all in everything. Yeah, just the most amazing cooldown ever. And the 4 set bonus, while not as good as the 2 set bonus, still is pretty good. Sure, it again is a chance because it on one hand depends on you getting 5 Maelstrom weapon stacks, which is very random. You gain another chance to gain attack power, which is like a chance built of a chance, but honestly, still 20% attack power makes up a huge amount, especially when you have endgame raiding gear, so it still is a pretty good tier set bonus. Alright, talking about races, I've marked the ones I think are best with green, and marked the ones I think are worst with red. Black just means neutral. Well, as Alliance you don't have a choice anyways, because pretty much you can play Draenei, or you can go Horde. Draenei are not that bad, because they get the additional hit rating, and the utility heal, which always is nice to have, but it's not like crazy good either. Horde, on the other hand, has amazing PvE ratios for a shaman. Orcs have expertise with axes and fists, which pretty much are the only weapon types you should be using anyways, which greatly allows you to optimize your stats. And on the other hand, your Blood Rage racial ability increases your attack and spell power, which is really efficient on Enhancement Shamans, because most of the other classes that benefit from this either benefit from the attack power or the spell power. Enhancement Shaman benefits from both, so great stuff. Tauren, I wouldn't recommend playing them if you are into min-maxing, because yeah, they have increased health and they have an AoE mini-stun, but nothing really like plays towards Enhancement Shamans other than the utility and the more bulk. And Trolls, yeah, they have nothing to like really say anything for them but their haste cooldown, and that one really is pretty damn good, so that's why I still think Troll is a very good consideration, even if they only have one thing speaking for them. As for professions, I'm just gonna go over the ones I think are most valuable. On the one hand, jewel crafting, of course, always is one of the best ones. You can craft yourself the jewels you will ever need. Also, the profession bonus with the jewel crafter unique gems will allow you to gem the stats you need. Engineering also is great because you get that haste enchant on the gloves, which you can activate every 1 minute to increase your haste by 400. It's great for bursting, but because Enhancement Shamans pretty much can like combine it, for example, with Shamanistic Rage to increase the damage output they consistently do. Alchemy is great too because you get the Empowered Flasks bonus, which although only gives you an additional... I'm not even sure how much attack power the flask anymore gives. It doubles your flask attack power that you get, and you also get the Endless Mana Potion, which allows you to manage your mana a bit more if you have issues with that. I personally deleted Alchemy and got Jewel Crafting instead, because I think it's more valuable. And of course, as a secondary profession, cooking always is very useful because you can get yourself haste or attack plus spell power buff food, which is amazing. You could also just stick to Fish Feast that somebody else provides, because it also gives attack power and spell power. But it's personal preference. I get the haste buff food because I prefer it. Alright, so this is it. How to DPS with an Enhancement Shaman. What's the priorities? What's the rotation? How do I press buttons? What do I have to do? I've put up one of the pictures here that is kind of my top DPS ever reached with 5.8 gear score, I think. Which is kind of formidable, I'd say. It was on a Deathbringer Soulfang 10-man heroic fight with one healer. So, yeah, we had a lot of DPS. So let me go over this priority list. I'm just gonna straight up jump into this. I hope you're ready to like write down or are very aware of what I'm saying right now, because this is gonna get complicated and very deep very quickly. So the priority list is basically just you are supposed to go from top to bottom, and yeah, if you can't do something, go one list element down until you reach the end of the list. So first of all, whenever you have 5 stacks of Maelstrom weapon, which is a talent you use to instant cast, you will be wanting to use Lightning Bolt. Chain Lightning doesn't have as much damage on single targets as Lightning Bolt, and Chain Lightning also consumes more mana than Lightning Bolt does. So whenever possible, just use Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning whenever you have those 5 stacks. As for when you can't do that, refresh your Lightning Shield to make sure that you can always get the Lightning Shield procs on your attacks, because obviously if you don't have Lightning Shield up, you lose a lot of DPS. You're supposed to always use Feral Spirit if the ability is off cooldown, unless, as I said earlier, you want to save it for the soon usage of Bloodlust or Heroism. Whenever you can, you should be using Shamanistic Rage too, because of the 12% bonus damage. If you have mana issues, you can save this one for whenever you need to freshen up your mana, because usually it's very easy with Shamanistic Rage to get like 80% of your mana back or some crap. So it's really, really good. If Shamanistic Rage also is down, you should just be using your normal spells, which starts out with Storm Strike if you don't have any of the nature damage increased charges left on the opponent. And Fire Elemental should obviously also always be used if it's off cooldown, because it also frees up one of your global cooldowns, because whenever you drop a Magma Totem, you will have a global cooldown, which means you will lose one spell in your priority list, so you can save some time. Also, Fire Elemental, I usually save it for Bloodlust Heroism to maximize the DPS output, because it really doesn't matter if you use it at the beginning or at the end without the glyph. If you don't have Fire Elemental up and no Magma Totem up either, then refresh your Magma Totem, because that also is some solid DPS output that's passive. Just by standing there, the Magma Totem increases your DPS. Except for that, yeah, if Flame Shock is not on the target, use Flame Shock. If Flame Shock is on the target and the shocks are off cooldown, use Earth Shock or Frost Shock. Earth Shock if you just want to deal the max damage possible. Frost Shock if you're supposed to slow an ad, such as for example an Ooze on Professor Putricide. If those are cast as well and you still have some of the nature debuffs on the opponent from Storm Strike, then use Storm Strike. This helps you a lot with getting the 5 stacks for the next instant cast, Lightning Bolt, because of 2 immediate attacks, and it also does great amount of damage. Yeah. Obviously it also resets the nature damage buff, even if not necessary at the moment, which gives you some more time. Lava Lash should be used whenever that all is on cooldown, because Lava Lash also is a very solid DPS ability and should just be used when possible, basically. If all of those things are done, you can cast Fire Nova, regardless on if you DPS a single or multiple targets, because Fire Nova still does solid damage. And if all of those spells have been cast, then you kind of really don't have anything to do with your global cooldown, so you can either refresh your Magma Totem, you can refresh your Lightning Shield, or you can just refresh all of your totems at once, what you really think is more necessary. I've talked a lot now, so instead of talking, I'm just gonna show you a video on how I DPS with enhancement for 1 minute. So, here you go, and enjoy. This is pretty much everything an Enhancement Shaman does. It seems pretty overwhelming, and also you obviously have to consider that I use certain add-ons to enhance me, but I'm going to talk about those later. You can, for example, also see the yellow runes in the center. I use Power Auras to tell me whenever I have a Lightning Bolt that is ready to be cast instantly, so I can focus on the other things as much as possible. If you have any more questions about the priority list, because it's pretty much is the most important thing, you can ask me. I also will link you to another guide from which I copied this priority list from, because I think it's very well built. So if you want to see it in its full detail, I will link you to the guide. Alright, so moving on. Some other things to watch when DPSing as enhancement would be that the most important part for you is really the management of your global cooldowns. You will probably be using a spell on every single global cooldown, which is every second. So this spec requires you to be on your toes and cast spells as fast as possible every second. If you have a lot of latency issues with World of Warcraft, then probably this spec was going to be very hard to play for you, because with the latency you lose out so much DPS, it's really crazy. This class really is the god of mixed damage. The ratio between physical and magic damage really is about 50-50 if you look at my recount, where you can see that melee and Wind Fury are the physical damage dealing abilities, and the rest would be magical damage. Except for that, I already mentioned it earlier, just don't be shy to use your cooldowns whenever possible. If you know that Bloodlust or Heroism will be popped soon, or any other raid cooldown, then save your Feral Spirit and Fire Elemental for that, because they benefit from it as well. Now for the more in-depth things, I myself think that building stats on Enhancement Shaman probably is really one of the most important things if you want to excel at DPS. You can't just stack stats and expect something to happen. What really makes Enhancement Shaman life a bit difficult is that you require the spell hit cap, which is 17%, which usually is different for all other melees. Enhancement Shaman pretty much is the only melee class that needs the spell hit cap, which is a shit ton of rating that you need to gather. On early levels or early gear stages, this can be pretty much impossible to get. So the most important part really is the 8%, which is the melee cap, but of course your DPS will still lose out by a lot if you don't have the spell hit cap. Obviously, if you are Drana, you get an additional buff, and if you have a Shadow Priest or a Balanced Druid in your raid, you get another hit buff. So you can kind of calculate those things in if you prefer that. There's a talent called Dual Wield Specialization, which increases your hit rating by 6% when you dual wield, it says. But this Dual Wield Specialization doesn't count for anything but melee attacks, so don't be fooled by it. It is still a great talent, because if you have the 17% spell hit cap, you will probably have about 21% melee hit on your weapon attacks due to Dual Wield Specialization, which is great considering that your offhand weapon can miss until you have 25% hit. We're not going to reach that, but it's still really great if we can avoid our offhand weapon missing. Next to the hit, we also require some expertise. Expertise is not that important as hit, and it also becomes less important once you have the ability to stand behind the opponent during the raids, because only thing they can do is dodge, really, and dodging your spells is impossible anyways. But still, it is a good DPS boost if you get the expertise soft cap, which is 26, and yeah, it's really easy to reach considering Enhancement Shamans get 9 expertise from the Unleashed Rage talent, which also pretty much is a must to pick anyways, because it increases your attack power by an additional 10%. The remaining stats that the Enhancement Shaman can choose from are not as important anymore. They pretty much play into your DPS min-maxing, but they don't influence the DPS by that much. I can only tell you that haste rating probably is the most efficient stat on an Enhancement Shaman, why I'm going to talk about it soon. Agility, crit and attack power are all pretty decent, and armor penetration should just be avoided completely. So why these stats? Haste rating really is like a godsend gift. Haste rating is everything you need to embrace as an Enhancement Shaman. If you have haste, you're gonna be fine. Enhancement Shamans use haste more than pretty much any melee class ever could. Why is that? Because they have an insane amount of proc chances. Meaning on attack you have a chance to trigger XYZ effect. That obviously means that your chance to trigger them is higher if you have a higher attack speed. So I've listed everything relevant for the Enhancement Shaman here. If you attack more, you have more chances on triggering your Wind Fury weapon, and also if you attack more, you deal more damage with your Flame Tongue weapon on the offhand. If you critically strike, you trigger the Flurry talent, which increases your attack speed again. So if you have more haste, you will do more hits, which means you can crit more often, which means you pretty much can have Flurry forever. You can also increase your higher chance to trigger the Static Shock talent, which expends one of your Lightning Shield stacks to damage the opponent with. So that's pretty good too, because the chance itself is pretty low. So to get the best out of this talent, you need a high amount of haste. You can obviously increase your chance to gain a Maelstrom weapon stack, and yeah, Maelstrom weapon is really a godsend gift with the instant cast Lightning Bolt. It increases our DPS output magnificently. And the other things to look out for is that Flame Shock ticks faster. That increases obviously the chance for a spell critical to occur, and that on the other hand can trigger our Elemental Devastation talent, which increases our melee crit by an additional 9% for the next attacks. So you can see everything is playing together, because if you get a higher chance on melee criticals, then you have a higher chance to trigger Flurry again. So if you build haste, pretty much everything influences itself to the point where your DPS rises by a great amount. Due to the fact that you get more Maelstrom stacks, you also have the chance to trigger your tier 10 4-set bonus more often, which increases your attack power by a whopping 20%. And your Best in Slot Trinket, Tiny Abomination in a Jar, also scales really well with haste. So you can see there's a lot of things speaking for haste rating. I got to the point where I use Mongoose on my weapons as enchants over Berserking, because I value the 30 haste more than the 280 attack power loss that I make. So yeah, that kind of speaks for its own, I'd say. Now, talking about the stats agility and critical strike, the thing why you don't really want to like build these proactively is that over time you will just get to the point where you have so much agility and critical on your gear that you will get very close to the crit cap in a raid, like especially considering if you have the Feral Druid or Fury Warrior buff, which increases your critical by another 5%. You also have to think about your critical strike chance increasing once you trigger the Elemental Devastation talent by 9%. You can see where I'm going. It's really easy to go over the crit cap with an Enhancement Shaman. Yeah, Enhancement Shaman crit cap is 67% if you have your 17% hit. So it's really just not efficient to go for agility and crit, even if it is a good stat on earlier stages of level of gear. But over time, you will just get to the point where you say, okay, I don't care about agility and critical anymore because I have so much that I just reach the cap anyways. And now, as to why armor penetration or attack power are both not so great. Both of them are purely physical stats, so they don't influence our magical damage at all, which means we obviously kind of lose out if we build those stats, because it only like makes up 50% of our DPS. So both of those stats are just not efficient. Usually also attack power we are provided enough with, because we get attack power from agility and attack power itself on the gear, which is pretty much on every item we get. Armor penetration in particular is a stat very well known for 3.3.5, because it can be really broken if you stack it to 100%. But the problem with the stat is that it becomes better with the more armor penetration you have. So you should either forego arm penetration, or you should get it to 100%. And getting it to 100% is a huge amount of effort, which is not worth it for us, considering it only applies to our melee attacks and our Wind Fury weapon. So you should not have any arm penetration if possible, just to make sure. Alright, now that I've talked about the stats, I can talk about gems and enchants as well. So if you don't have hit or expertise cap, you can always gem and equip towards that. And there's also some good wrist and hand enchantments to help you with hit and expertise rating. If possible, always get haste enchants, although there only really is mongoose on weapons and the haste enchant on the cloak. And get the Ice Walker on the boots if you need hit. Else, I recommend you just go for the Tuska's Vitality utility. Attack power really isn't that great as an enchant, because we have enough attack power anyways. So we shouldn't worry about that too much. Yeah. As for gems, I myself have 18 haste gems in my gear, I think, and I have pretty much endgame gear. And I have a few expertise gems to trigger red sockets, because obviously the meta gem Relentless Earth Siege Diamond is requiring a red, a yellow, and a blue gem. So I have to make sure I have everything. I do that by putting a Nightmare tier into a blue socket, which increases my strength, agility, stamina, and intellect by 10, which I all benefit from, even though strength kind of is underwhelming, it just gives attack power. But still, it's great in comparison to any other blue gem. And except for that, red gems I usually go for expertise, and yellow gems I spam haste. And I pretty much forego socket bonuses, and as long as my meta gem is triggered, everything else is just filled with haste gems. And yeah, Relentless Earth Siege Diamond, for those of you who don't know, it increases your agility and your critical damage by 3%. So it's really great with all the critical mechanics we have. As I said earlier, enchant weapon with mongoose. I think mongoose is pretty great because there's a high odd for you to trigger it, considering it doesn't have a global cooldown like Berserking does. If you play on WoWmania, Berserking might be a consideration, because Berserking doesn't have a global cooldown on WoWmania, meaning you can trigger it permanently instead of only every 35 seconds or so. But still, I think Mongoose is the way to go with the haste procs. Now, some specific items. First of all, I'm going to talk about those 2 items that I've had very much time spent with. The first would be Bizarre's Totem of Shattered Ice, which really, it's pretty much, you could replace the equip effect with increases your haste rating by 220, which is fucking batshit insane. It's great, get it. Anybody who gets the other totem that increases your attack power on Storm Strike, no, don't do it. If you hit 80 fresh, get this as soon as possible, followed by tier 10 pieces to trigger the set bonus on 2 pieces. Black Bruise. I've spent so much time trying to figure out if Black Bruise actually is fucking amazing or not, because I mean, this effect sounds crazy cool, doesn't it? But it turns out, after all, Black Bruise really does nothing to your DPS, considering any other 264 weapon, except for that Black Bruise makes the DPS even more inconsistent. I had fights where Black Bruise made up like 5% of my DPS, I had fights where Black Bruise made up 1% of my DPS. I just don't like the volatility. And that's why I, over time, started using the normal weapon from 10-man Heroic again, over Black Bruise. And now let me also talk about the best in slot trinkets, which would be Tiny Abomination in a Jar and Hekumi War Token. The second one is really easy to get, it only costs Frost Emblems, so it's really nice, it's easy to access, and it gives amazing stats. It increases your haste by an entire 153, and also constantly increases your attack power by 340 during boss fights, pretty much. And Tiny Abomination in Jar helps you out greatly with the hit cap by providing you a big amount of hit rating, and also Enhancement Shamans love the Mode of Anger equip effect, because if you do a Storm Strike, you get a Wind Fury proc that is 2 melee attacks. Wind Fury triggers another 3 attacks, meaning you can immediately get 5 Modes of Anger at once. That's like crazy. So if that's even followed up by a melee attack, because Storm Strike obviously doesn't share the attack speed of a melee attack, and you get another Wind Fury proc, that will lead to you instantly having a Mode of Anger proc, which is an additional weapon attack, which can again proc Wind Fury and Modes of Anger and all of your melee procs. Crazy. Really just a crazy trinket for Enhancement Shaman. It probably increases your DPS output by a consistent 4% or something, which is really great. As for Enhancement Shaman add-ons, I recommend you use Enhaprio if you have the feeling that you're going to be challenged with doing this in hardcore raids. Enhaprio is the add-on I showed earlier, where you can see the rotation I do go down from top to bottom. It's pretty much an add-on that always tells you what is next on your priority list. Cooldowns is an add-on I use to show me the cooldowns on my spells, so I can always keep that in an eye and plan out things. Mixed scrolling battle text I just like a lot, because it's very easy to watch all the damage I deal and how exactly the damage is split up. Like, I can always see every single Black Bruise proc or something on mixed scrolling battle text, and I just prefer it over the standard battle text display. Omen is great for threat management, although I don't really ever have a lot of issues with threat. It's still a nice thing to have. Snowfall Key Press probably is one of the add-ons nobody really knows. I love it because Snowfall Key Press makes your spell trigger once you push the button in, not once you release it. So it pretty much increases your cast time and reactions indirectly, which I still think is really great, and I love using it on my Shaman. Titty Plate's great, really just is for visuals, because I prefer it over the standard nameplates on boss fights. Just much more visible, shows your threat, shows the percentage of HP on the boss, yeah, and way more visible when there's AoE going on with multiple enemies. One thing I forgot to mention is Power Auras, which, as I said, can be used to track your Maelstrom stacks, can be used to track your Lightning Shield stacks, so when it runs out, you know when to refresh it, and so on and so on. Power Auras really is a great add-on overall that you can play with. And last but not least, of course, Deadly Boss Mods really is a great add-on for anybody to have who raids. So yeah, that's that. So that has been my Enhancement Shaman presentation. I've been rambling on and on. I could be restarting this right now because I messed up my speech sometimes, but I hope that even though I did some mess ups, you still enjoyed the guide. It's very in-depth in my opinion. I hope it shows just my passion for how much I love playing Enhancement Shaman. If you have any questions in specific about the class, the specialization, anything else, you can even ask me about different classes and stuff. I have a very wide experience. You can just go on ahead and do it in the comment section. If you want me to do a guide on another specialization or class, then you can leave that recommendation in the comments as well. I would be planning to do Elemental Shaman, but yeah, this is very time consuming, so for now this is going to be everything for me. And I hope I could get you interested into playing Enhancement Shaman, because I think it really is the most unique melee spec you can play. It's really a lot of fun. So yeah, this has been my presentation, and I'm